Well, Grant, how are you doing today?
Hey, how you doing? Well, I'm doing great. How are you?
Good, good. Well, thanks so much for taking the time to come on the show. Um, could you kick us off and just kind of give us a brief bio and some of the big ideas you're interested in?
Yeah, so my name is Grant Dever. I'm from Rochester, New York, and I currently live in Austin, Texas. I'm the author of Lead the Future: Strategies and Systems for Emerging Leaders, which is a kind of self-help book targeted at mostly students and other young adults trying to level up their leadership game. I co-founded a startup incubator at my alma mater, the University of Rochester, targeted at the undergraduate population there, which is some of the where I got a lot of the material for the book. Um, and then I would say that as far as big ideas, I've mostly been diving very deep into nuclear energy and nuclear energy policy, Bitcoin, just everything Bitcoin. It's a giant rabbit hole. Every time you think you're like, I get it, I understand everything, you find more. And then community building and its decline. Those are all the kinds of things that I'm very interested in.
I love that. I love that. Lots to unpack. But the decline of community, I have a feeling this is a very real phenomenon. Even if you just look at PTA participation, since the 60s, like just been on this huge decline. People like don't get together very much at all, especially with COVID nowadays. It's like even explicitly banned. So has there been like some big decline in community? Am I sensing this correctly? And if so, like what can we even do about it at this point?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely real. I haven't seen anyone even argue that it's not real. So I guess that's the
That's good
ultimate
stuff.
contrarian take. People are actually not alienated. They're not lonely. That's if you
Very
can make
connected
that
now.
happen,
Yes.
there's something for you there. But yeah, I would say it's so one thing that immediately pops in mind when you say that is, especially bringing up COVID, is
Yeah.
I just think we have such a, and obviously this isn't to like decline in the 80s or 90s. Obviously, the internet is not as large of a contributing factor there, but especially as the internet has developed in video games and all this, wonderful consumer technology that I've been addicted to at various points in my life. One thing, one little anecdote is like when I co-founded this incubator iZone at the University of Rochester. We were trying to help students to, whatever their idea was. It could be uh, creative project, just artistic. It could be nonprofit. It could be a business. We were really agnostic. It was about very early stage things. So we had this 12,000 square foot space in the library, all these desks. We just want, and we built it from nothing. There was nothing there. There was just sentiment that students growing up watching Shark Tank,
Yeah.
the Social Network, all this, they wanted some space to find other like-minded entrepreneurs. And we had this one student who, took an interest very early, and he had already started a business just repairing people's phones on campus. And he, so he had that, and he was just like, "Hey, could I like have a table where I can meet my clients and maybe do a little marketing in the space and all this kind of stuff?" And we were still figuring out like what our policies would be. And we initially were like, yeah, totally, that's fine. Which, right, like
Yeah.
he's a
Sure.
student,
Yeah.
he already
Absolutely.
has a business. It's amazing. Like
Yes.
students have a problem, he has skills, he solves it for them.
Yeah.
Amazing. But and then some of our compatriots in fellow higher education administrators informed us that we probably couldn't do that because the university's like non-for-profit status could like maybe be in jeopardy. I kind of understand why that rule exists. Like if the federal government and some donor like kick
Yeah.
in for some really expensive capital that then you can use, you can't just like let your friend use it on the weekends
Right.
to run a business and an extremely profitable high-tech business.
Yeah.
But at the same time, that just seemed like kind of a glimmer, or so in juxtaposition, like a student comes in, let's just pretend that I don't even know what a good startup is started by students, but some crypto startup had
Yeah.
come in and they were like coding in this at the same table that I would have gotten the student. They're coding there. They like write all the contracts. They create all the marketing. They're running their Discord. They launch, ICO territory, whatever, back when I'm in there,
Yeah.
and they just become like a millionaire with this like business, whatever. that would have been totally fine. Like there would have been no way in which we could have like known that was going on. So like in some ways, like these rules, which make sense, have like criminalized in-person commerce, and like really made it difficult for people to actually engage and do things in the real world. And then I think with, there's something I've written a little bit about. I don't remember the name. I don't remember exactly the name of the piece, but I'm kind of worried. And in some place, like it really depends. Like with COVID restrictions, really matters where you live,
Yeah.
obviously, especially now. But I do have some worry that as alienated as people are, and they don't have these things or have a community, we're actually adding so much friction that we're actually going to kill it even more. Because like we went from being like, oh yeah, you can't engage in these commerce, to be like, you can't actually meet. Actually meeting is not allowed.
It's not allowed.
And like
Yes.
someone's going to come stop that. And obviously they're, whatever. I don't know all the specifics. But I think there is a question of are we going, we all have to take our shoes off at the airport. What are going to be the residuals from kind of, the pandemic, and to what extent are those going to, further undermine community? I think is a huge question. So what to do about it is kind of a whole separate piece. I personally am just trying to do my own little part by, being an active member of communities in various ways, both online and then especially in person. And I want to be writing more about this subject, but in general, trying to help people to do that as well. I mean, there's all kinds of little things you can do to build community. I think community is kind of all about doing those things that don't scale,
Gotcha.
because you can't be. I think it's I forget, Drucker, the effective executive. He's like, you can't be efficient with people, and I think
Right.
that's kind of like the same thing. So any other questions? But yeah, that's my kind of like overview thoughts.
Gotcha. So it seems like a really difficult challenge then, like how do you instill community, like in American life again, encourage people to kind of, people don't join their social clubs like Kiwanis and all these Ruritan, and like that was very common like when I was growing up, like that just doesn't happen anymore. Like these places don't really exist. Is part of that, like we've got the internet, so I can like find my super niche, like interesting like thing. Like we met 1517 fun reading group, and like there's no one within like 50 miles that's interested in that reading group except for me, that would read these like texts and talk about them. And so like I go on the internet and I can meet like-minded people like you, and we can talk about them. Is part of that, like that kind of crowds out like your local, like you've got to hang out with my local people here in Durham, but if the local yokels aren't Grant, so it's just like less interesting. Is that
Yeah, I think to some degree it's like that's certainly happening. I don't know how true it is, like that's kind of the question, is
Yeah.
like is you get to this point where it's like, well, it's obviously a lot easier to do that to some degree.
Right.
Maybe not a specific group or something on the internet, that might not be
Yeah.
possible, but it's easier to coordinate even just now. Okay, let's hop on Zoom. Like that's less logistically complex than like you only fly to North Carolina to
Yeah,
your
and then
studio.
Yeah.
So but I think on the other hand is like there's definitely a lot, like I think we're this is something which which came up in one of the readings we did, which was Dark Age Ahead by Jane Jacobs, which I highly recommend to everyone. It was I don't know, really depressing but also incredibly insightful. And so she kind of defines so one of the arguments she makes in there is that Google and the internet broadly, Wikipedia, are not going to prevent a dark age, because a lot of the knowledge that's important, which is lost and leads to a dark age, is actually that knowledge which is shared peer to peer, like embodied, how to do XYZ specific thing. And one of the things that she talks about in there is that in a dark age, obviously you've forgotten something. Or society, your civilization has forgotten something, and because you've forgotten it, you don't know what it is. So
Right.
you can't. So with that, I kind of think we're at a point where lots of people have never lived in a community. I actually feel very fortunate that I grew up in like a small town with a clear community, and that does have its like problems, But I think at the same time, I know what that is, and I feel actually at this point very blessed to have it. So growing up, I was like, why do we live here? Why do we live in the middle of nowhere? It doesn't make any sense. And I felt that way for a while, and that's actually something I kind of changed my mind about, because I feel like now I understand kind of the small town, residual of what was a community life, and I understand obviously like megatropolis, mass culture life as well.
Kind of like these hard trade-offs, right, between these two. It's like and how do you get such a more optimal outcome there? I'm curious. Did you grow up in Rochester, or you just go to the University of Rochester?
I grew up in
Okay,
a small town, like 25 minutes away from Rochester, called
gotcha.
Honeyway Falls.
Okay, so
Yeah.
you're in the area though. So I think of Rochester, I think of Kodak. I think of like the decline, this like great American company, and it feels like a lot of these things all they all run back to like 1971, right? So communities getting hollowed out, all kinds of housing prices shooting up, all essential goods shooting up. Where do you come down on what happened in 1971? Do you think there's like a cultural problem? Do you think it's just we've used up all the low-hanging fruit? Like what do you think about this at the end of the day? Like if I had to push you on it, because it's like
Yeah,
really hard.
I think, yeah, I don't think there's an easy answer. I tried to like sum it up, and I'm like thinking about this at the end of our reading group, and
Yeah,
I think there's no way to talk about it without kind of rambling a little bit. So
right.
I'll just say that I do disagree with people who attribute it all to the end of the gold standard. Even if I
Right.
do think there are arguments about the merits of having a hard money to measure
Yeah,
against. I don't think that that's even probably the like that's probably a second order effect,
yeah,
is what I would say. I think a lot of it, and I don't know, a lot of it seems to be a function of education, and with that, kind of like morals and values, in the sense that like, so the piece of like why would that have happened in 1971? I think it could be a function of how higher education ballooned as far as the amount of people enrolled, as well as its kind of like social status in like following the post-war years. So like those chickens kind of like came to roost in 1971, and then like because I think a lot of the problems that we're living in right now are really kind of a function of like a mismatch between kind of like human capabilities and the things that we need done. So there are a lot of people who get paid insane amounts of money to do good jobs, but then there are also like all these great jobs that just are like, which are really even like robust against technological advancement, like plumbing and all these jobs, which are tough for sure.
yeah,
But we don't even like people don't even know how to do those things. And more importantly, which is not their fault, but like more importantly, you used to be able to go to school and to some degree maybe you get like tracked into like, hey, you're not going to college, buddy,
right.
but like it seems like you like to work with cars, we're going to train you as part of your public education, and then when you're 18 you're going to be making like 50 grand a year. And it's like, yeah, if you ask a
Yeah,
lot of people if they could be making $25 an hour when they were 18, they'd be like, yeah, I
yeah,
probably wouldn't have gone to college, or
yeah,
whatever. Like
exactly.
whether or not that's the like right choice, like
Yeah,
there are so many people in our world who would say that, and if you don't know any of them, you're in a bubble.
yeah,
And
absolutely.
I think so. So I think some of that's like the second order effects of that. Also, like to some of these questions where people are like, why aren't things still like, why aren't these economic factors still the same way as they used to be? Like, why can't a
Yeah,
family do this or whatever? All great questions. I find them very interesting, but I think there's also a portion of this that's just like, the macro environment is just completely different. Like certain
right.
policy things you could do, like you can't do anymore because it's not like America is the only place with capital and like intelligent people. Like there's lots of capital. There's no shortage of capital.
Yes,
There's lots of
more
intelligent
capital into what to
people
do with.
everywhere.
Yeah,
Yeah, and there's lots of intelligent, competent people. So we're just in a different competitive environment, and people can there are lots of specific trade-offs in there, and then I think that part does kind of tie back in to the education, where you do have this like kind of stratification of like people who are like, oh, I'm the elite and I deserve everything, and they kind of operate from like either a more kind of like class-based analysis, or like just a raw individual or like familial analysis. But either way, none of this is comparable to kind of like, if you had an economy which was more localized. Not saying it all should be, but if you had an economy that's more localized, like people might be like, oh, how is this going to impact the community? Now
Yeah,
you have
right.
like maybe small examples of that where people are like, you can't, this company can't abuse those workers. That means that like, no one's going to be there to pick up those kids from school or something like that. Like you get like little glimpses of that, but that kind of like analysis and framework was probably a lot more common. And now that's just like not really a thing.
It's like not in the equation, not factored in the equation. I'm so curious. One of my friends, he's an electrician, and recently he shared something with me. He said they're in North Carolina, where I live, there are more licensed electricians over 80 than under 35. And it's just like this crazy thing. But at the same time, like I am struck by the fact it seems like the status penalty is a lot higher than it was in like 1960, 1970. Do you get that feeling as well? Like, like trades work is somehow like much more stigmatized than it was in the past.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think that's kind of, it's all like, or maybe there's like a thing where we can measure ourselves against other people more readily than we could
Like
before.
Instagram,
I
like you
think
can see what's going on. Like,
yeah, I think that phenomena is just so real and so toxic, and that's kind of why, like, I think a lot of people are just kind of beat down because of that. Or there's also ways for you to just like fall, we all do it, I've done it numerous times, like fall in some kind of bubble where you're just barraged by the same messaging over and over again, and you're like, oh my god, I figured it out, I understand the whole world and it's terrible, and it's like, yeah, like even if that's true, it's like, okay, well, that's not fun. What are you going to do about it? So I think there's, like maybe the way out of that is to, be like, actually, I think it's a lot higher status to go do that. Like when I hear people making different kind of different decisions that are paying them well, and they're getting like hands-on experience, and they're not necessarily just like going on the conventional like college path, even though
yeah,
it worked out fairly well for me. So I can't knock it, but I would say that I think people taking those kinds of risks, especially if they're like, this is what I want to do, I know what I want to do, I respect that more than anything. So I think in general, regardless of what people want to do, if they know they want to do something and they're really good at it and they're committed to it, if you're knocking them for that, you're really being a jerk.
yeah.
Like just don't do
cool.
that. Yeah, one of my friends, he like knew he wanted to be like a BMX like bike rider, like when he was like 6 or something, and he just spent all of his time doing that. And now he, obviously I'm sure there are lots of people who thought they were going to do the same thing and didn't go anywhere, but he, actually does that professionally now. And like, I think he's by far one of my most successful friends. I have no idea like what, how that pays or anything about the dynamics of that really, but like he did the thing that he wanted to. It was very niche. He didn't go to college.
Yeah,
and it's awesome.
And it worked well. It seems like we'd be better served just to look around a little bit less and try and figure out, what do we really want to do, and try and go execute on that. Well, it's just easy advice to say, right? But like very difficult to execute on.
Yeah, I've even found that in Rochester, it was kind of easier to do that to some degree, because I didn't really want to be doing any of the things that my friends were doing. So I didn't really copy them. Like I wasn't interested in it. But then other things are, now being in Austin and being surrounded by people who are all doing these things where I'm like, oh, I could maybe do that, or that's cool, or I wish I had your lifestyle. Like those temptations are much stronger. So that's something that I really experienced in college as well. Especially if you just like select for like a certain type of like hard charging, people born with from parents who are very like elite kind of thing. It just like really compounds and like trickles down, and you can create a culture where everyone's like, maybe I also want to be an investment banker. And
investment
I'm like, I don't even know.
It's so great.
I don't even know what that is. I still like, I kind of know what it is now, but like at the time I was like, maybe I should get an internship in investment banking. And I was like, I don't actually know what that is.
Yeah. It's a great point, right? Like it's very bizarre how these things are driven. It's so weird. Um, I want to switch topics a little bit now. This left-hand turn, but Bitcoin. You spent a lot of time with it. I'm curious. To you, what is the bull case for Bitcoin? To me, it looks something like it's new economy gold or something like that, and that's a good reason to be long Bitcoin. And like, what do you think about it?
Yeah, I think essentially that's like the thesis that I find most compelling as well is we still have essentially like the global market for Bitcoin somewhere around $1 trillion. Global market of gold is around like 10, $11 trillion, whatever it is, so we still have 10x from here.
Yeah.
In Austin, there are a lot of people who are kind of like radical Bitcoin bulls who think it's going to go much higher. I love to listen to them talk about things,
Yeah.
and there is
Yeah.
a lot of technical development. It's kind of funny because again, people get like stuck in their little echo chamber. And like, if I wasn't surrounded by these people who are like working in Bitcoin, I wouldn't hear about any of the like little technical things either, just because like most people don't care about that. So they're not talking about it on the internet. And they're not like, oh, we invented a whole new use for Bitcoin. It's like, here's this thing which is going to enable this kind of service, whatever. Like they're building the fundamentals. But yeah, I think Bitcoin is strongly differentiated. No one is really trying to compete for its niche. It doesn't have like, Ethereum kind of is to some degree with like the ultrasound money thing, but it's not actually the same thing. And I'm kind of worried that may be like an own goal. I've heard different arguments about it, but Ethereum has a lot of competitors, and Bitcoin maybe has one or it has zero. And that's kind of the thing there. And I think that in general, it made a lot of Bitcoin made a lot of trade-offs to be the most decentralized it could be, so that everyone can run their own node, and that's why it has so few transactions per second. So and then I think memetically, it's kind of strongly differentiated in that it had by far the fairest launch, probably the fairest launch that will ever exist. People who were mining Bitcoin were all just kind of random people who like stumbled upon this thing and were like, I'll run a weird software for internet money. No one knew they were going to get rich. This is evidenced by the fact that people traded, what is now like billions of dollars of Bitcoin for like a pizza or like, weed or like whatever.
Exactly.
So, and even people who were early, like, if you bought in at $10 and you're like, all right, you know what, I'm smart. I'm just going to buy, I don't know, like 1,000 Bitcoin or, 10,000 of them.
Yeah.
And then I'm just going to hold it. Cause like, whatever, if I lose that money, it's not a big deal.
Yeah.
A lot of those people sold at like $100 or they sold at $1,000 or they, but either way, like the idea that like all these people were early and they amassed it. Of course, there are some people who did that. And some of them just got lucky that they like forgot about their Bitcoin.
Forgot.
But at the same time, it's just like, it was extremely fair. Memetically, it's just kind of brilliant. Like I think it kind of I need to write this piece, but I do think it kind of borderlines on like a religion, but like in a good way, in a way that feels good as an investor. So I'm bullish on Bitcoin. I think it's actually very interesting, and if you think it's just kind of boring, you probably haven't thought about it too much, or you're just extreme novelty brain, and it's like, yeah, me too, bro. I feel you, like, no worries.
I love that. Well, if you don't mind me asking, like percentage wise, what does your portfolio look like in terms of Bitcoin?
As far as crypto, I'm mostly in Bitcoin, just because I and some of this is memes, but also like it's differentiated positioning. I just understand how to value it more. Like it has a clear kind of thing. Like I don't know what the valuation of Ethereum should be. I don't really have a good model for that. Obviously, people are trying to create different ones, and like I probably don't own enough of it, like or I should have purchased more of it, like 3 years ago or whenever, when I was looking into these things. And I also wasn't particularly early or anything. Like I'm just like been stacking small amounts, like little bit by little bit. So yeah, I'm mostly in Bitcoin, and part of that just because I didn't get lucky with any, kind of altcoin. I've speculated like a little bit, but I'm also not a trader. It's like, that's the other thing. I also kind of like Bitcoin because it's just like, just buy a little bit, and you don't have to trade it or anything, just hold it. And don't be overexposed. I may
Yeah.
be a little bit overexposed right now, but that's what it is.
Yeah. The way I guess. And I guess what I was asking is like in terms of overall portfolio, is it like a quarter, half?
Oh yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
so the other thing, yeah, I'm like more like a half, but some of that's just because I
Gotcha.
like burned through my cash. But I would say,
Fair enough.
so the last 2 years have been weird.
Yeah.
But I would say that I also do think it is, there are not that many investments that like even really have kind of like a call for like a 10x or whatever. And
Yeah.
I think Bitcoin is still kind of like the most de-risked of them. So if you are a young person, like you should have, I think you should have some exposure
Yeah.
to digital assets in general. And I think Bitcoin is the least
That's a good,
risky of
yeah,
all of them in my
a good
analysis.
choice.
But
Yeah. Definitely. I think it definitely has the best case of the stuff that's out there. And there's a lot of crap out there you got to be worried about.
yeah, it's kind of like the even if like right the maximalists have been wrong, like you could argue at least in the time scale,
Yeah.
like like who knows, like maybe they'll be more right in the future, but like in the time scale that they've operated in, obviously if you were just 100% Bitcoin and you like didn't get exposure to any given
Yeah.
asset, like yeah, your net worth could be a lot higher. But like the other hand is like there is a positive aspect of maximalism where if you became a Bitcoin maximalist, like maybe you wouldn't have like lost all your money on some other coin, and like you'd be doing fine if you had just bought Bitcoin. So like
Yeah.
so I kind of see the argument both ways. I'm not a maximalist myself, but I understand the appeal.
Very cool. Very cool. I love that. Um, Nuclear energy, very important, solves like a lot of our energy problems for the future. And it's technology that works today, but we just like, it's just not allowed. How did you get to start working in nuclear policy, and I know you're new to it, but how's the journey been so far?
So my journey's kind of weird. I definitely, like, I remember being interested in nuclear energy, and I think getting more interested in it in 2016. It was actually part of Andrew Yang's
Oh, nice.
platform. So that was something where I was like, okay, like let me look into this. I think I heard him talk about it a little bit, and I was like, oh, that makes sense. Yeah, we need all the low carbon energy that we can get. Like, makes sense to me.
Yeah.
And I'd heard people kind of like, I actually started reading this book again a couple years ago. I didn't finish it, called Physics for Future Presidents, and I remember
Nice.
it also
That's
kind of
excellent.
like
Yeah.
yeah, I
I read
remember
that a
it
while
kind of
back.
like
Yeah.
yeah, it like kind of addresses like a lot of concerns about radiation and like all the kind of like basic things. So anyway, I became interested in nuclear energy, and then it really kind of accelerated over the last 2 years because I became connected with my friend Emmett Penny. Shout out to the nuclear barbarian himself, and he, we connected to this community that I joined in 2020 called IndieThinkers.org, and there I connected with Emmett, and he was this cool guy, and we would just do these like work sessions where we all hop on Zoom, say what we're going to work on, and we just like sesh for like 4 hours. And Emmett was kind of like falling down like the nuclear energy advocacy rabbit hole. And, I was just following him on Twitter and his Substack and stuff like that, and reading more and more about it, and kind of hearing arguments in favor of nuclear energy and why we need it. And he actually doesn't even totally come at it from like a environmental standpoint. He actually comes at it more from like a labor and like society thing. He's like, we need reliable energy because like you can't just have like
Right.
whatever vulnerable population you're worried about, like they're more vulnerable if they have a rolling blackout.
Right, exactly.
So the extent that you're letting a grid like approach or become where there's not enough supply, like where the base load is not there. If you're letting that happen, then like all these
Messed up.
people are
Yeah.
totally vulnerable. Businesses can't operate that way. Hospitals have generators and stuff, but like, if that stops, whatever. So you need reliability, you need affordability. If no one, I haven't heard anyone be like, oh man, my electric bill has gotten so much cheaper. Like
Exactly.
that's kind of like the fundamental heuristic. Like until we hear people saying that, it's like, well, clearly we haven't figured this out, and like currently what we're doing hasn't really solved the problem. And then he really comes at it from kind of like a labor standpoint too, where he's like, a lot of these are actually like, that's more of his background, but he's like, you know, a lot of these are really high paying, good jobs. And, you know, New York City is like, I was actually in New York City and they had rolling blackouts. Like,
Oh,
I actually think that was before Indian Point closed.
yeah.
And like, I got this like phone notification being like, turn off the air conditioner or whatever. So it's like a heat wave. They're like, turn off the air conditioner. You know, some like working class person who's just a good
like,
person
Jesus.
is like,
Yeah.
I guess I'll turn it off. And
Right.
I don't want there to be rolling blackouts. And then like, meanwhile, you just know in Manhattan, there's just like some
It's like,
empty apartment,
it's
just like
just like going
blasting
crazy. Yeah.
AC. So
Yeah.
it's like, yeah. So yeah, and then I guess like when they closed Indian Point, it just like destroyed like several towns. Like there's just all this like fallouts, and then the big thing for people to understand is that building a new nuclear reactor is so much more difficult. Like just because of the like regulatory things and like the capital requirements and all this kind of stuff
Yeah.
that comes up on the front end. That preserving our existing nuclear fleet is like absolutely vital. So that's why people are so focused on that, and then hopefully. It's actually interesting. Both the Trump administration and the Biden administration are actually, for the most part, like extremely pro nuclear. So like it does seem like the tide might start to change on that. And then we also just saw that in the EU they have like a taxonomy of like essentially like I don't know exactly what it is. So this is maybe conflating it a bit, but kind of like what energy sources like qualify for like some sort of ESG type thing.
Gotcha.
So like essentially they had tons of investment available. Maybe it's through like pensions, tons of investment available for renewables. And they ended up kind of like underinvested in natural gas, which is like caused some problems. And then like also it's been difficult to maintain and expand like the nuclear fleet because like nuclear energy was also not classified. And now both natural gas, based on from lobbying from Germany, is now considered to be
Oh my God.
green and environmentally friendly energy, and thanks to France, nuclear energy is now considered to be a environmentally friendly low carbon source of energy. So it's interesting because so like to some degree we'll see kind of how this shakes out in Europe, but could also be kind of positive for America in the same regard. But yeah, I just had a weird kind of as far as getting into the actual policy stuff. I've been reading a lot of, and I actually kind of came to it also through Bitcoin. Obviously, there's concerns about Bitcoin's energy consumption, which I don't think is a good argument against Bitcoin. Also, it's not going to stop Bitcoin, so it's not really worth arguing about. Once you understand Bitcoin, you'll understand why I just said that. But anyway, and anyway, there's lots of things you could read. I was reading Nick Carter about this. He's probably one of my favorite Bitcoin, analysts and propagandists. I only wish I was as good as him. But I was after reading, basically when I got to Austin, I didn't really know that many people. I knew some people through Twitter.
Yeah. And
then I knew that I wanted to get involved in everything Bitcoin here because there's so many companies and people and developers and all this stuff. So I actually had like a LinkedIn subscription that I had gotten on like an extreme discount during the pandemic. So I was like, I'm unemployed, or like, you can get it for like $20 or something ridiculous. So I was like, I mean, if it gets me a job, it's how all these like rationales go.
Yes, exactly.
So I had like all the credits that they give you left. And I was like, you know what? I just got here. I'm going to lose them. So I was like, unsubscribe. I'm not paying to renew this thing. Yeah. Thank you for the cheap membership. Yeah. And I just started cold messaging like everyone who had Bitcoin in their profile in Austin who seemed interesting. And was just like, hey, I just moved to Austin. Like, I'm a Bitcoiner. I'd love to meet. Any recommendations for meetups or things I should go to or people I should meet? And I got like a bunch of responses, and they invited me to this meetup. They invited me to this meetup that's like from Unchained Capital that recurs regularly. It's pretty fun. It's like kind of a developer meetup, which is people talking about all these like little technical developments that are way over my head, and I'm like, I kind of understand what's going on. And then there's a big barbecue afterward with drinks, and that's more my speed. So I went there and met a ton of people. Anyway, connected with all these Bitcoiners. And then Emmett came to me, and there's this group, Stand Up for Nuclear, which is doing like kind of like global pro-nuclear advocacy. And he was like, hey man, I'm working with Stand Up for Nuclear on these events that they're hosting. We need someone to kind of represent in Austin, and I know that you're interested in nuclear energy to retweet and share your own posts on this thing. So I'm gonna put you in a call. Basically, I just moved here. I had like no friends. I'm on this call with these organizers, and they're like, "So do you know anyone in nuclear?" Basically, they just kind of wanted like to educate people and organize a little bit, and then also get like kind of a photo op, be like, in Texas they care about this, in Austin they care about this. And I was like, I think I know one guy. He's like a big like Nixon guy, so he likes nuclear energy because Nixon wanted to build a ton of it. And then I like thought about it a bit more. I was like, oh, I know all these Bitcoiners. So I actually ended up hosting a couple meetups at the intersection of nuclear energy and Bitcoin. And a lot of people were very interested in that. They were familiar with some of it. I learned a lot through the experience because some of the people were like, yeah, I like work in, transmission, and they're explaining all these things to me that I didn't really know. And then I wrote a Substack. I think I own Nuclear Bitcoin Fixes This.substack.com.
Nice.
And I wrote a piece just kind of outlining the gist of like why Austin Bitcoiners should be in favor of nuclear energy, and just kind of like making that case succinctly as I could. Partially because I didn't want to like have to grab a microphone and like rant at people for like 20 minutes at the event I was having. And then had the event, it was fine, got my photos, all that, met a lot of cool people. And then like a week or two later, the president of FREOPP, the think tank that I'm working at, DM'd me and was like, hey, like I run a think tank. Like I saw your piece that you wrote about nuclear energy and Bitcoin, like we should get lunch. And then he offered me a role working part-time at the think tank. So, and right now I'm just very deep, like definitely, trying to get all the fundamentals down on nuclear energy. But also just trying to understand the energy market in general, and like how the grid works. And I'll just say that energy is just an insane topic. It's so complicated and maddening. And based off of everything I've learned right now, I'm kind of radicalized. But I think in that we definitely need nuclear energy, and we probably need all sorts of like regulatory reform at the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, probably like lots of other bodies as well. We shouldn't be living this way.
Yeah, absolutely. It could be so much better, right? It could be so much better.
And that's always optimistic, right?
Yeah.
Like it could always be better.
Yes, exactly. Well, people like you are working on it, so it gives me hope. Like, it is possible to fix some of these things. I'm curious. So, I just won a big grant to help implement land value taxes. This is kind of like I'm a Georgist. This is kind of like I can put a pin in this. Like, I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but land value taxes.
No. I've read Radical Markets. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Gotcha. Very cool. Very cool. And I'm curious, you're new to the policy game, but what have you learned so far about, actually changing like policy on the ground? And have you found any big takeaways yet? I know you're fresh to it, but
I'm pretty fresh to it. I would say, I mean, from the inside, I've just seen like how much work goes into like connecting with people, like really obviously you see the papers or the articles or whatever, but actually like the amount of like phone calls that are going on, relationship building, some of the like strategic kind of marketing that goes into it too. So I think that's something that's interesting. For example, Ovik Roy, the president, he wrote a very great piece about Bitcoin and kind of like America's like current fiscal and monetary situation. And he like went out of his way to get it published in, I think it's National Affairs. I always get them confused, but like he got it published in a specific journal because that's the one that all these staffers read.
Gotcha. Like, that's what the staffers go to. Yeah.
Yeah. And he planned that out like way ahead of time to make sure that it would launch, and it was kind of about inflation, and it came out when everyone was talking about inflation.
Yeah.
But he had laid the groundwork to get that in the journal like months earlier. So that's like the maybe the tastiest thing I've gotten, and I'm sure he's fine with me saying that.
Yeah, so I'm sure that's a ton of work.
That's just basic inside baseball kind of stuff, but
right.
It's interesting.
Yeah, yeah. And I have been impressed how important it is, like getting in front of staffers seems to be like, and how it's almost scary how much of a driver that is for a lot of policy, just in general.
This is kind of a weird anecdote, but it's related to nuclear energy and staffer. My mom, brief after college, she kind of also randomly ended up working for the senator of Oregon, Senator Hatfield, and he tasked her, or like someone tasked her in the team with doing research about nuclear energy at the time to decide whether or not he was in favor or against nuclear energy. And my mom decided that he should be in favor of it.
So. Nice. Very cool. Runs in the family.
Yeah, apparently.
Must be genetic. I love that. Let's see. So another left-hand turn. You've written a book. Are there any, if someone wants to go out, they want to be a content creator, are there any, is there any general advice you would give, in starting that journey?
Yeah. So for writing a book specifically, couple caveats. One, it's definitely tough. Two, you're unlikely to make a lot of money selling a book. So keep that in mind. You will learn a lot though, which is valuable. And I also kind of think there's multiple reasons, but I think writing a book is actually a pretty good project to do, or at least one book. It doesn't matter, right? Like, I wrote a book, kind of over, I talk about it. I have the access to the material. I can do things with it in the future. But like, I don't think about it all the time. It's just like, oh yeah, that's a thing I did once.
Yeah.
So if you're like worried, like, oh, is it going to be good or whatever? Like, I'm lucky that my book is good. So no, I'm just kidding. But I would say that, like, if you're worried about it, like, it's not going to define your whole future, and
Gotcha.
It's probably not going to pay you any money, and you'll be lucky if people read it and tell you they don't like it, or even just give you negative feedback. I want more negative feedback. If you listen to this podcast and you read my book and you give me a 3-star review and tell me why it's kind of bad but not that bad, I'll appreciate that.
Yeah.
So I would say I actually taught a course. I wrote my book as part of a cohort, partially led by this, or in kind of collaboration with this professor, Eric Koester at which one is it? Georgetown University. And essentially he created a curriculum to help students to write a manuscript to then publish it through like some indie press or self-publish or whatever. Yeah. And he kind of created a toolkit for this. So I wrote my book through a cohort that I like co-led at the University of Rochester at the incubator that I was working on. So I was kind of leading the cohort. I was like, well, if I'm going to help you do this, I need to also write a book. Yeah. And I actually was initially going to write a book about Bitcoin, or not about Bitcoin, but about like not money uses of crypto back in a time when no one, like, people were talking about it, but like compared to
much
now,
smaller.
Like not at all. And I actually pivoted because I realized that I didn't understand it at like a depth. Like, writing about technology is incredibly hard, and I realized I didn't understand it at the appropriate level of analysis. So I was like, this book's going to be trash. So, if you know that your book's going to be trash, maybe also don't publish it. But anyway, we kind of had like a formula where first you so the beginning is you just want to do research. You want to get exposed to a lot of information and ideas, and practice taking notes. So the kind of theory of this course or curriculum was like, okay, you're a young person, you think you're really interested in a specific thing, you want to get a job working in this field that you're interested in. You're so interested, you're going to write a book on it. So basically what you would do is you would start generate a list of like people or people who are like kind of friendlies within your network, who then you can go and interview. Just come up with some basic questions. They're probably not that good. It doesn't matter. Call these people, ask them about this. People are probably not doing this. Also, if you're like, I'm a student, I'm writing a book about this thing, can I interview you as like a expert? They're probably like, I'm not an expert, but sure. No one wants to hear me ramble about this thing I'm interested in. And you'll learn some things that way. Those people might be able to make intros for you, but either way, you're kind of developing the skill set. You get a little confidence, you learn more about what you're writing or what you're planning on writing about. And then a lot of times those turn into warm intros. And like people have like started this, like talking to like their uncle and like their mom's best friend's husband and like their brother's like, dorm, like freshman year roommate, and then like ended up talking to, whatever, some like, you're writing about venture capital, something, and then all of a sudden you're like, talking to Michael Gibson, so it's like
exactly.
these things happen like pretty quickly. So and so essentially that's like the beginning of it was kind of like you do this like kind of primary research via like interviewing people, and the goal there is that you want to pull stories from people, because like if you look at like the structure of most nonfiction books, it's like here's some like takeaway pieces, and then here's like a bunch of stories that kind of like beat the point into your head, which is actually important. Like if you just listen to like, I'm sure there are maybe some Blinkist fans here. I've never actually used it, but I think if you just like spam the like spark notes of books in your brain, it really doesn't do anything. You kind of need a like visceral story. And like maybe you could use Blinkist to like get the summaries, and then you could like create your own stories to make it visceral. But either way, I think you kind of have to like engage the imagination to have like a lasting thing, or better yet, like act on the thing. Just be like, oh, let's see if this is true. I'm gonna apply it and see how it feels. So those are some of the things that I learned. The other thing I would say is that beyond just general it being kind of tough, I kind of felt like it was 3 different sprints that are back to back to back, which I don't need to say it, but anyway, so it's kind of like three sprints that are back to back to back. So it's like, researching, it's like maybe that's like kind of a warm up, like that's really not that bad. Then drafting the manuscript is like, especially with a deadline, is definitely like very intensive. There was lots of late nights, early mornings, like lost sleep, especially like those last couple weeks trying to get it done before you go to Oktoberfest with your friends. Like you like oh, did I lag out a little bit? But you and then there's editing is like kind of the second sprint, which is its own whole kind of thing, and that's where I didn't really feel too stressed about anything until I was kind of in the editing thing. It's like, okay, like whatever is here is going to be in the book, and like that felt really heavy, and it actually didn't. It felt the heaviest after I like pressed submit. When I pressed submit on the book, and I maybe I had more time to like where I could have edited if I wanted to, but I submitted it. And I was just kind of like I was in the Czech Republic. I wrote a lot of the book while I was traveling, and I was in the Czech Republic, and I like submitted the book from this like bar cafe thing. It was already mostly done. It was just like I had to press the button there. And then I like went and got like a beer and was like kind of celebrating and talking to people, having fun. And then I was like walking home, and I was just like, is everyone gonna hate me? Like that was just kind of like my feeling, because like I don't think, I mean, even if you read it, I mean I'm a good liberal, so like I didn't say anything too bad, but it's just like I have my like heterodox takes in there or whatever. I was like, are people gonna still like me after reading this? And then the whole third sprint is selling. And my book got published in December of 2019. And then I had the holidays. And then it was kind of like, I was like getting everything ready in January. Like I was like, all right, I'm going to be like working out and stuff. And like in January, I think I worked out like 20 out of 30 days of like January 2020. I was like totally on my grind. And then I was on Twitter at the time, and I just started seeing like the early Balaji posts and like people talking about things. And then I got totally wrapped in the coronavirus story. And like, little did I know, I would just be like down, like on and off again, like kind of down the like coronavirus like rabbit hole for like the next 2 years. Anyway, I like that kind of sucked the wind on my sales. Or my like desire to sell and like go out and do things. I was, the beginning of the pandemic was definitely really kind of like tough. Last year was also not very good. Feeling a lot better the last like 6 months, especially since moving to Austin, and feeling very bullish on 2022. But you know, I'd planned to go do like a college tour and like all this kind of stuff. And like I could have been like, oh, like let me do all these Zoom talks and stuff like that. Right. And like, you know, as you and I know here right now, like talking on Zoom can be cool. But I was just like, I don't want to do that. Like I wanted like these schools to pay me to like show up and like for me to be, you know, lecturing in front of the class, like, you know, being wild, and then have some student come up to me afterward and be like, can I get dinner with you or something? And be like, yeah, sure, of course. I don't care.
That's all I want.
So that's what I wanted. So yeah, I never did that, but maybe I will at some point. But I haven't done that. So those are my takeaways. So just be mentally prepared for that. That I think considering them both kind of like maybe they're marathons instead of sprints. That's probably the better thing. They're tough. They're long. It keeps going. Yeah, something like that.
That's the structure of the process. I think that's really helpful just to think about, and how each piece. I think people often forget the third piece, right? You know, you got to actually go sell it. It's very, you know, you got to have some distribution mechanism to really make it work. Even then, you know, I know Matt Iglesias was talking about it recently. You know, even his books don't sell that many copies. Like it can be very difficult grind.
Yeah. No, I did buy 1 billion Americans. So when Matt listens to this, he knows that I'm one of the people who bought and read it. I also read it. I didn't leave an Amazon review though.
Oh man. Bummer. Are you down for a round of overrated or underrated?
Yeah, I'm totally down.
Awesome.
Can I caveat, or is it just raw underrated?
No, you can give us a sentence, you can caveat, whatever you want.
All right.
Awesome. Overrated or underrated? Taleb.
All right, I would still say that Taleb is underrated. I disagree with him on a couple issues so far, and I think some of his students will succeed him. But I would say that he's underrated to the extent that like not enough people have accepted parts of his worldview, and I think if they do, they'll be better off, and will be better off.
At the very least, I find Taleb hilarious. I mean, just like, just straight up, you know, calling people BS.
I love the books. The books are
incredible.
Funny, funny, and they're great. Yeah,
and they're not really reducible either in a way that very few books, you know, are past that criteria nowadays, I find.
Yeah, I would say that, right, like Taleb is actually the opposite of kind of the pattern that you know, if you're an undergraduate student or like someone who's still like me or whatever, you should probably write a book the way I said to. But if you want to write a great New York Times bestseller, you know, you got to figure out how to write something as kind of unique as what Taleb has put out there.
Absolutely.
There's no formula.
No formula. That's a great point. That's the formula. The formula is there's no formula. The University of Rochester, overrated, underrated?
I think it's hard for me to say. It's like underrated to the extent that like I don't think most people have heard of it. And they should, because it's like, you know, top 30 school or whatever. But like, should it be ranked higher? I don't know. It's hard for me to know because I've been on the inside. So like when you're on the inside of any institution like this, you're kind of like, how does this thing actually work? Like, I'm kind of surprised that this thing is as good as it is from like the inner workings that I see. But like all colleges and universities might be like that.
Right.
So maybe like slightly underrated. Underrated. If you've never heard of it, it's totally underrated to you. You know, get informed. But
awesome. I love that. Austin, overrated or underrated?
Totally overrated. Don't move here.
Stay away. Keep the rent low.
I'm a local now, so
I love that. That's great. Well, Grant, thank you so much for taking the time to come on today. You know, where should we send people if they want to find your work?
If you want to find my work, you should go to www.seekingtribe.com. I also do post on Twitter at Grant A. Dever. I'm currently deactivated, but maybe by the time this comes out, I'll be online. But either way, you may or may not find me there. And then go to Amazon or just Google Grant Dever. Honestly, just Google Grant Dever, and you'll find everything that you're looking for. Yeah.
Awesome. I love that. Thanks, Grant.
Yep. Thank you, Will.